We're turning now to a big problem that we all deal with, the spread of misinformation. It has seemed to increase over the last several years in this country and always tends to happen when there's a big event, whether it be in politics, a big issue we all care about, even a big weather event like we're dealing with right now. So to answer some questions about this, we want to bring in Delwiche, communications professor with Trinity University. Thanks so much for being with us on this very winter day in San Antonio. Let's talk about first, what is misinformation and disinformation? Those words are used a lot, but what are the differences between the two?
Sure. Well, I think that both misinformation and disinformation are bad sources of information. It's information you wouldn't really want to use as the basis for a decision. I think the difference is intent. So misinformation is information that's wrong or misleading in some way, but isn't necessarily being propagated with a desire to deceive people. But we've seen increasingly in the wake of COVID, in the context of the most recent elections, disinformation, which is misinformation, which is deliberately spread with an intent to deceive.
Professor, on my own social media channels, I have been surprised by how many people that are well-educated professionals who have bought into many of these conspiracy theories that I would think that they would never believe in. But what is it about this specific time period we're living in now that has made this such an easy thing for people to buy into?
That's a great question. And I think the answer is at several levels. I mean, first of all, we're living in a time of extreme partisanship. Through some of the largest crises that many of us can remember in our entire lifetime. I mean, I don't think any of us have seen anything quite on the scale of this global pandemic. So you have this partisanship, you have something like this pandemic. You also have the fact that we're all extremely busy, just trying to do the best we can from day to day. And so when we see information in our social media feeds, we end up taking shortcuts, not always asking questions like, who actually made this claim and are they a credible source? And I think something else that's happening is we tend to look for information that confirms our own biases. So as a liberal, I might be more likely to agree with information if it reinforces what I think is a liberal. And conservatives do the same thing.
We talk about social media, and that really has been a key ingredient for the spread of mis and disinformation. And a lot of people may not realize exactly how social media works, how the information they see is appearing in their feeds and why. Can you explain what we all need to be looking at when we're seeing links presented as fact on social media?
Yeah, that's a great question. So first of all, what we should be looking at when we see links presented as fact or memes presented as fact is really thinking about what claim is being made in this image or in this Facebook or Twitter post that I just saw. Like, what is the specific claim about the world that this person is making? And then equally important, what is the source of evidence that supports that claim? And that's what's almost always missing in memes and is often missing in social media posts. And the other thing we need to be aware of is the fact that our social media feeds are tailored to our own interests. So we like to think that everything is just sort of flowing in real time. My aunt posts something, then my mom posts something, and my dad posts something, and I see it like one after the other. But really what's happening is the social media feeds are deciding what things we're interested in and then giving us more of that. So if I tend to click on things that I'm outraged about, then I'm going to get more things in my social media feed that make me outraged. And it's sort of a vicious circle.
What is the best way to address this when you see people like your family members who are sharing things that have been debunked, they've been proven false, they are flat out conspiracy theories? I mean, the immediate response is, oh, well, you're just sharing fake news. How do I believe your point of view? How do you point this out and direct them down the path to the truth?
Yeah, it's difficult to do. I don't think we know exactly what the answer is, but we know what not to do. And we know that you definitely, don't want to shame people publicly and say that's fake news. How dare you post that? And I don't think you want to shame them privately. I think that a private message, contacting them that in a way that kind of builds on your pre-existing relationship that doesn't have to do with politics and doesn't have to do with conspiracies, using that as a basis for a conversation to figure out why they care about this and to kind of gently point out flaws in the logic. I think that's much more effective than saying this is fake news.
We talked to you for our latest episode of KSAT Explains, where we talk about how a lot of these conspiracy theories have gone from what a lot of people would consider dark corners of the internet to now being talked about in mainstream media. QAnon, for example, that's something a lot of people had never heard of a year ago, and now it's sort of a household name. So you talked about how conspiracy theories, while this one may be relatively new, they are not new when it comes to our country and especially politics.
Absolutely. In fact, as far back as 1798, there were conspiracy theorists in the United States talking about conspiracies that had supposedly infiltrated the US government. Back then, it was the Freemasons and the Bavarian Illuminati. So we've seen conspiracy theories throughout our country's history. It's sort of a cycle. We'll go through a period such as in the late 50s and early 60s, again in the 90s, and again most recently, where we are really in the throes of intense conspiracy theories. And often they're relatively innocuous. Jim Morrison of the Doors didn't really die, or Elvis Presley is still alive. Those are obviously innocuous conspiracy theories. The thing that's really troubling to me about QAnon, more than almost any other conspiracy theory, is the fact that it actually has a lot of similarities to anti-Semitic conspiracy theories that were popular in Nazi Germany. And also, the QAnon theory culminates in this fantasy of rounding up one's political opponents and arresting them and executing some of them. And so that conspiracy theory in particular, to me, seems very, very dangerous because it culminates in a fantasy of attacking one's political opponents.
Something we've heard a lot about in the past year or so is media literacy. Explain what that is and how people can practice being media literate.
Great question. Media literacy is, I think, a fundamental skill in a democracy. As citizens of a democracy, we have to make decisions based on the information that we receive. But in order to make sure those are sound decisions, we need to really be asking questions about that media content. Who is the source? Why was it put in front of my eyeballs? What's going on with my own reactions to this? Do I have a tendency to want to believe things like this? Media literacy is about stepping up and asking questions and also sort of nudging the people in our lives to do the same thing. One great place to learn about media literacy is the site Propaganda Critic, propagandacritic.com. That's a project that I worked on with students at Trinity University and support from the Mellon Foundation. And that also includes links to other great media literacy sites.
We all have to be our own investigators these days. Professor Delwiche, thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
And I would like to mention, if anybody wants to go check out that episode of KSAT Explains, From the Fringes to the Forefront, you can do so right now on demand on ksat.com/explains or the KSAT TV app. We'll be right back.